Hi everyone, and welcome back to your MDI Life of Christ class. This is the last video in this first week, and in this video I want to address the temptation of Christ that occurred at a point shortly after his baptism and in his wilderness experience. The Apostle Paul writes, "In order that no advantage be taken of us by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his schemes." That can be found in 2 Corinthians 2:11. Let's take a look at temptation in general before we get into the specific situation in the life of Christ that we want to examine. There is much the Bible has to say about Satan and how he operates. There is much to be said about cultural myths regarding Satan, but we don't have time to discuss that here. But let me say this. The powerful tools of Satan are sin, death, and Hades. Hebrews, the 2nd chapter, the 14th verse, tells us that Satan possessed the power of death for a period ending when Jesus said, "Do not fear, I have the keys to death and Hades." Revelation 1:17 through 18. Ephesians 2:2 tells us that every person who is disobedient to God walks according to this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience. So we know that temptation does not come from God. That is specifically stated in James 1:13. So temptation is always from Satan. And it serves an enticement to break a specific command of God, as in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, or God's law, as 1 Corinthians 15:56 says, "The sting of sin is the law." Satan desires control over the eternal destiny of every man, woman, and child descended from Adam and Eve. And that process begins with sin, and as Satan takes advantage, he leads the individual to more grievous sins. And what I refer to as the spiral downward begins. The more sin, the further the person travels from God, and consequently the harder it is to come back. Perhaps the saddest biblical example of this is King Saul, who at the beginning of his reign in the Old Testament is numbered with the sons of the prophets and prophesies under the power of the Holy Spirit. Later, he disobeys an order given to him by God through God's prophet Samuel regarding the Amalekites. This leads to God rejecting him and his offspring as kings in Israel. Finally, after consulting the witch of Endor, his death and that of his sons is predicted by Samuel and occurs the next day in battle. That story is given to us as a warning of what Satan can do to an individual if left unchecked. Satan is no joke. He is an adversary whom no man could defeat. It took God becoming a man and succeeding where every single man, woman, and child before and since have failed. And please note that in addition to all of the passages frequently quoted at Christmas time and in reference to Jesus coming for the salvation, there is a passage that we mentioned earlier, which needs to be mentioned again, that states, "The Son of God appeared for this purpose, that he might destroy the works of the devil." 1 John 3:8, the second part B of that verse. So the victory of Jesus on our behalf of our salvation is closely intertwined with the additional purpose of defeating Satan. Satan is not a minor player in this story of your salvation. Hebrews 4:15. We've discussed this verse before too. It says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, yet without sin." In 2 Peter 2:9, it says this about Jesus, "The Lord knows then how to deliver the godly from temptation." When Satan tempts a person, he does not tempt them in an area of strength. He tempts them in an area of weakness. I don't think there could be any significant dispute about this. We all have areas that are strengths, and there is no temptation for us in the midst of those strengths. What may be a temptation for me may not be a temptation for you, and vice versa. These are not the areas where Satan attacks. He attacks in areas of weakness. But this begs the question, how does he know what our weaknesses are? He is not omnipresent, and he is a created being just like you and I, only he of a different creation class. He is, by virtue of his creation, both more intelligent and stronger. He has at his disposal a network of demons that give him what I will call and refer to as a simulated omnipresence. They watch and determine your weakness and tempt you accordingly. I think Jesus was an exception to what I just stated. I think Satan took a personal interest in Jesus and probably watched him himself. Remember that as we come to this event in Jesus' life, you have some high drama taking place. Jesus is approximately 30 years old, and he has never sinned. And I don't think that there's any doubt that Satan was acutely aware of this exception. Up until now, by the time any man has turned 30, Satan has had him firmly in his grasp for many years. But not so with Jesus. Not only would Jesus arrive at this confrontation sinless, he would leave this confrontation the same way. He would remain that way, succeeding where all descendants of Adam and Eve had previously failed, leading the writer of Hebrews to say that he was without sin. The Apostle John records the very words of Jesus the night before he died as being, "For the ruler of this world, Satan, is coming, and he has nothing in me." John 14:30. So now what we have recorded for us is, in my opinion, Satan's best shot. I do not believe these were the only times Satan tempted Jesus. I do not believe it was the first time. So understanding this as the context, Satan approaches the God-man to hit what he has strategically concluded is his weakness. What is it? The three temptations that Jesus faces, I believe, can be summarized together so that their order doesn't matter, and you will find that there is a different order in 2 and 3 between Matthew and Luke. What was the one thing that Jesus wanted more than anything? He wanted to obey his Father's will in acquiring man back from Satan. To do this as the promised Messiah. But we find out in the garden that he also wanted to escape the cross if possible. So Satan offers Jesus in all three a shortcut to becoming the Messiah that eliminates the cross. Now, I can't take credit for this one particular conclusion regarding these temptations, as I was taught this by my Life of Christ teacher several years ago. But I do find this conclusion to be the most satisfactory considering all the facts. Not only does Jesus go on to be the Messiah by way of the cross, but his path also provides us with the promise that is contained in 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide a way of escape also, that you may be able to endure it. Luke, in his account, records that when the devil had given him his best shot, he still left him until an opportune time. Satan apparently was very persistent even with Jesus. And this is why Jesus taught us to pray in Matthew 6, deliver us from the evil one. And this should be a part of your faithful prayers as well. Now, I hope this session was beneficial to you in your understanding of this subject regarding temptation, and more specifically the temptation of Jesus Christ in the wilderness.